Good evening. We're now ready to begin our shir for this week, which is, of course, Parashat Vayikra. It is, with it, we enter a new world. We enter the world of korbanot. And 1 second, I do hope I can get everybody in. 1 moment. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I have everybody. Good evening, everybody. We will begin again, and we'll begin, of course, this is an exciting evening because we begin the study of Vayikra, which, of course, departs quite drastically from the earlier two Sforim of the Torah, Bereshit and Shemot. The Rambam mentions that actually korbanot in Hashem's eyes are really plan B. The reason korbanot were instituted, at least according to the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, is that the people at the time in the world who worshipped anything, whether it's idols or in any other form of deity, only understood their relationship through sacrifices. And of course, the pagans, their view of the relationship with God was drastically different from our understanding of the relationship between human beings and God. To the pagan world, God was unreachable and also had little or no interest in engaging in any meaningful relationship with the people here on earth, any more than, for example, you and I, while we may not deliberately harm even ants or kill them, but if we found out today that we stepped on a few ants, we would not lose sleep, because our relationship with that part of the creation is very distant and very non-intimate. But of course, with Avram Avinu and Judaism, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with the world is seen as the loving of Avinu Malkeinu, our father and our king. We find that, as a matter of fact, Chodesh Tov, we're beginning tonight the month of Nisan, Chodesh Hazeh Rosh Chodeshim. It is the first of the months, and we'll be saying Hallel tomorrow. And as we say Hallel, the very beginning, the very first paragraph the very first parak that we relate is Parak Kuf Yud Gimel. And that is that whereas the pagans say Ram al Kol Goyim, they see God as the creator of the world, but distant, remote, uninterested in our daily affairs and our joys and our pains and our worries. That their understanding of God is Ram al Kol Goyim. But David HaMelech very carefully in Parak Kuf Yud Gimel shows us the drastic difference between Hashem's view, our view of the world, and our relationship with Hashem and the pagan view. The pagan view stops there. Ram al Kol Goyim, that God exists, but he's distant, and there is nothing that connects us. But we, as Jews, see HaKadosh Baruch Hu quite differently, that we have a relationship with God, and that relationship finds itself in, even though we don't deny, of course, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is higher and high above all the nations of the world, but nevertheless we say Hamashpili lirot b'shamayim u'va'aretz. Tomorrow on Hallel we will say, Hashem, you are above all, but mashpili, you lower yourself lirot b'shamayim u'va'aretz, that you are concerned about everything in the universe, and particularly in the affairs of human beings. And then, of course, finally, the third section of that first parak in Tehillim tells us that it's not only the interest that God has, but rather it is Mekimi me'afar dal, me'ashpot yarim evion, that God, this God who rules everything, is willing to lift up a person. Mekimi me'afar dal. Dal is a person who is lowered in stature, lowered in economic ability, in general, not looked upon with any sense of compassion for most people. But here in this parak, it says, Mekimi me'afar, God will elevate from the dust, dal, umeashpot yarim evion, from even more dire circumstances. From the dunghill, he will lift the evion, the individual who is, evion comes from the word avo, aleph bet hey, which means to desire. And evion is a person who desires everything because he has nothing. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu elevates that person from the dunghill to a place of dignity. And then it goes even further. Lahoshivim nedivim, to place him among the princes, that God can do too. And then God is even willing to transform nature. And that is Moshivi Akeret Abayit Eim Habanim Smecha, that this HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who indeed created the universe and dwells Kevayochal in the heavens above, he nevertheless will even transform nature when it is coming to the aid of those who are destitute, those who feel they have no hope in this world. And so that a woman who cannot bear children, God actually then can even transform that so that he will transform her into a happy mother of children. So this is the difference between the pagan God and the Jewish understanding of God. The pagan God, if they believe in God, and many did or do, they believe in a God who is distant. He is the creator, but not one which is concerned. And the korbanot, which we are going to learn about tonight, and of course for the next couple of months, these korbanot indicate that we have and can have a relationship with them, and that when we do things that are wrong, there is a way for us to become better. And that's what we're going to deal with this evening. Rambam says that really the rest of the world, though, the rest of the world felt that the reason you bring korban is purely to appease God. But that, as the Ramban says, and others say, that's not why we bring a korban. We bring a korban. The word korban comes from the word karov. Not that it protects us from God, but it does the opposite. It brings us closer to God. That's why it's called korban, karov. And so therefore, that is what we use. Now, nowadays, of course, when there's no Beit HaMikdash, Chazal tell us, "U'neshalma parim sifatenu." Now, when we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, and most of us, by the way, quite frankly, don't have animals, we can bring in their stead our prayers, our lips. U'neshalma parim sifatenu. Our lips will be in place of the. Tonight we're going to examine. The korban, the korban chatat, which is brought when korban chatat is among the categories of korban that is brought when we acted carelessly, or at the very least without the necessary concentration and intent, and by doing so, we either did something, an act that was wrong, or failed to do things which we should be doing. And there we will find in Parak Daled Pasuk Bet in this week's Parsha Vayikra, we find the following pasuk: Nefesh hitechate bishkaga. An individual, and here it's called nefesh, meaning to say our nefesh, which is that which is the spiritual part of us, has been harmed by not doing mitzvot, we do not necessarily cause ourselves any bodily harm. But the nefesh, that which really makes us us, is harmed. Nefesh ki techeta bishgaga, that a soul or a person who carelessly acts, not intentionally. We'll talk about that in a moment. Does not intentionally act in an inappropriate manner, but nevertheless fails to do what he should. Mikol mitzvot Hashem asher lo tasena, with any of the mitzvot that we are that urge us not to do a certain act, and in fact, the person does or violates the lo taseh, something that we should not do. So then the person is to bring a korban. Now the korban here, it's called a korban chatat, and the concept of bishgaga we'll talk about in a moment. Remember though, someone who deliberately violates the Torah and does a lo taseh, performs an act which we are told not to perform, and they do it deliberately, that person cannot bring a korban. That's it. That doesn't mean that they are forever damned, but it does mean that the korban is not the route that they are to take. And we're going to see that the Sefer HaChinuch tells us why that is so. Another person who does not bring a korban is a person who is a complete onus. Complete onus. And because he was a complete onus, God forbid he was injured in some way in which he didn't realize what day it was. Complete onus, had no knowledge, no way of knowing what day it was, and he violated a lo taseh, let's say, of Shabbat. So then that person is also patur from a korban if he was an onus. Onus means that they had no desire to act inappropriately or to not act appropriately, either way. Now, we're going to talk for a moment about what makes an act a human act. That's what we're going to focus on a little bit now. What makes an act a human act? So what is it? First of all, what do we mean when we say it's a human act? It's an act for which we can be held accountable for performing in an inappropriate manner, or for not acting when we should have acted in a certain way. That is what we would call a human act. And the human act has three components to it. And we can remember them from the call letters Daled, Bet, Resh, Davar. An act for which we can be held accountable. In other words, there's schar va'onesh on that act. Has to have all three elements present. First is Daled, Da'at. We have to know that what we're doing or what we're not doing is a violation of a mitzvah of some sort. Okay? We should not be doing this on Shabbos, but we did. So we have to know that it's wrong. The second thing for which we can be held accountable, we're going to get to shogeg in just a moment, but this shogeg means to say inadvertent actions. The second thing for which we can be held accountable is we're going to give the letter bet in davar. Bet means bechira. If I had no ability to act differently, then that's not a human act. Person knocks over a vase while he's sleeping, and when he went to sleep, he wasn't near it, but he rolled over, had no idea. So that he had no bechira. He did not have. He maybe knew that it's wrong to destroy property, but this situation he did not. He had no choice because he was sleeping. The third element of the human act is resh, ratzon. You have to have a desire for the consequence of the act that you did or did not perform. Davar, da'at, we have to have knowledge, be held fully accountable. We have to have bechira, we have to have had an option to act differently. And the third is the resh of davar is ratzon. We have to desire the consequence of the act. This way I'm going to get the money, or this way, whatever it may be, or this way I'll see friends, and so therefore I'll drive to to shul to see friends, whatever it may be, that if we desire the consequence of the act, so that makes it a human act for which we can be held accountable. Now, where does a shogeg come into this? The shogeg is a person, by and large, who is missing the element of da'at, of knowledge. She or he either does not know that it's wrong to do this. I oftentimes pick the example of borer, right? Now, borer on Shabbat, we know, is something that we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to take or separate the psolet, the unwanted material, from the ochel, from the wanted material. We're allowed to separate the ochel, the desired material, from the undesirable material, but we're not supposed to let's cut away things that we don't want deliberately and then go and so that we'll have what we do want. It has to be the other way around. We are to choose the good material and leave what's left will be the unwanted material. Now, let's say a person doesn't realize the borer, that particular halacha is not something which is prohibited on Shabbos. Well, then he's missing da'at. He can honestly say, I didn't know that I couldn't do this. I was unaware that I couldn't do this. And for many Jews, of course, it might be, if we were living in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, halavai, this wouldn't happen. A person would say, I didn't realize you're not allowed to drive a car on Shabbat. And of course, we know there are many Jews who really, honestly, don't know. If you're brought up in Wyoming or Nevada, and you have no idea about Hilchot Shabbat, so then that's a lack of knowledge. And that might very well qualify you for a court. But there is a caveat. The question is, there are really two forms of ignorance, lack of knowledge. One, I'm going to give you two examples. One is, let's say, not Shabbos, and it has nothing to do with halacha, but we will apply it to halacha. I'm driving along, and all of a sudden I see that there's a policeman behind me with his blue lights flashing. I pull over, and the policeman said, "Are you aware that you went right through a stop sign, and you didn't even bother to slow down?" So if I say, "Sir, or ma'am," as the case may be, if I didn't know. I have a very close friend who's in the hospital undergoing surgery, and my mind wandered, and I'm truly sorry. So now that's a form of ignorance that I could have overcome. That is called vincible ignorance. Vincible ignorance, meaning to say, I could have acted differently and prevented this violation. I could have taken a cab, could have taken a bus, I could have walked if it's within a certain distance. But when I got in that car to drive, so I knew that my mind was preoccupied, but that preoccupation led me to violate, in this case, the law. But it's as Rav Hirsch mentions, he says that not about the driving, but he said the truth is, a person is to concentrate when they do mitzvot, and when they come into mitzvah situations. And if you are preoccupied with something else, right there, that sets up the failure of doing the avera, or in this case, violating the law. But what happens if? And so therefore, one could understand where the judge or the police officer can say, you should have chosen a different option. You had two options, but you chose the one which could have caused great harm to you, damage to other people, or God forbid, it could have killed someone. But there's a second thing where, for example, if I'm going down the street, and again, I see this flashing light and a blue light, and I pull over, and the policeman said, "You didn't stop at the stop sign." And I said, "Well, I'm not aware that the stop sign was there." So the policeman said, "Okay, come out, look." So I look there, covering the stop sign is the branch of a tree that was blown down in the summer, where the green leaves covered everything with only a speck or two of red, which peeked through the branches. There, I can say, it's true. I was ignorant. I knew that you're supposed to stop at a stop sign, but this stop sign was obscured. And so therefore, I should not be held accountable for that. That is what we call, both in terms of general law and Jewish law, that is called close to onus. I could not have known otherwise, but it's called invincible ignorance in the law, in the general law. I was not reasonably expected to stop at that stop sign because a normal person going at a normal speed who was conscientious and doing what he should do, that person could not be expected to peek through the limbs of the tree to see if there was a stop sign obscured by it. Now that principle applies within Judaism too. And this is the principle of shogeg. Shogeg is a person, and for that we'll see what we bring a korban for. The shogeg is permitted to bring a korban, provided that person took whatever steps they needed to not to violate the Torah. If a person say, Lee, I didn't realize about Borah, my goodness, I'm sorry. But let's say he had just had a shear on it, he was in class, and he decided instead of that, he either ditched class or was looking at some other material while they were learning about Borah. So then his lack of knowledge was vincible. It was vincible ignorance. There, of course, we get into a shadowy character. Now, very often when we get up in the middle of the night on Shabbos, and rarely, but it does happen, where we flick on a light. So that is also called shogeg. Why? Because even though I know that you can't turn a light on or off on Shabbos, but for that split second when I woke up, I was unaware it was Shabbos. And therefore, shogeg is when there is a lack of knowledge for which you, generally speaking, could be understood as not having the ability to overcome it. And that is what is called invincible ignorance. And therefore, for such a thing, bring a korban. When my ignorance is invincible, I could not reasonably have been brought to not to violate the law, or violate, in this case, the halacha. Then that's what a person brings a korban for. If they did it on purpose, no korban. If they had absolutely no choice, also no korban, but for a completely different reason. Ones rachmana patre. The halacha is in the Gemara that when a person could not have acted otherwise. It's raining on the first night of Sukkot, and everything is it makes it impossible to even go into the Sukkah without becoming drenched. Even on the first night of Sukkot, for example, we can invoke. We try not to, but we can invoke the idea of ones rachmana patre. When a person is there, they do not have two reasonable options. In this case, they only had one. That is, that they can't. So therefore, they would be pater. We're not talking about a korban there necessarily, but the idea of the Torah recognizes there is such a thing as onus, where a person really has lost his free will. Okay. On the other hand, where I have free will, a drizzle, and I certainly want to be able to eat a kazayas in the sukkah, and also I want to make sure that, and I know the halacha. So then a person, that's when a person can, let's say they forgot the halacha, they didn't realize, but they tried. That person brings korban chata. Okay, so that's where we have it. Now the Sefer Chinuch says that we bring such a korban when it's bring korban chatat. Why do we bring an animal? Because he says, the Sefer Chinuch says, human beings and animals, very little divides human beings from animals. The only thing which really separates us, we have hearts, our anatomical systems are very similar. Now, that doesn't mean that we even know that it is possible for a short period of time to transplant organs from other species into us. So that difference is relatively little. It says the Sefer Chinuch long before we had heart transplants, but it says the Sefer Chinuch, and the difference between us is ayin. It's virtually nothing. But so what separates us though? The intellect. That separates us. So therefore, when a person does not use his or her intellect the way we should, in order to be aware, A, of the halacha that confronts us, or the situation in which the halacha is found, I say, Shabbos, and I could have. That's a lack of knowledge. That lack of knowledge brings about the obligation to bring a korban chatat at the time of the Beit HaMikdash. And whatever that lack of knowledge was, I didn't know the situation warranted it, or I know that I'm prohibited from doing such a thing, but I didn't know the situation, or I knew the situation, but I didn't know the halacha. And I missed it, and not because I slept through shir, but I missed it. People oftentimes don't know halachas, therefore you bring a korban chatat. So the Torah gives us provision to be able to become better. And says the Sefer HaChinuch, why do you bring a korban? Because since there's so little difference between humans and animals, and the distinguishing mark of it is knowledge, is seichel. When that knowledge becomes blurred, and then we dispatch the animal, so we realize, A, that it could be us that deserves that, but B, that in fact, that's where my error is. And now I know better. So I take an animal, which is not required to have knowledge. And here I am, a human being. I have the opportunity through my knowledge and through the use of my mind to act in a way which HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to. That's why the korban chatas is effective, or shogeg. So that wraps up our discussion of at least of one aspect of korbanot. As you know, there are numerous categories of korban. There's an asham, and there's an olah, hatat we discussed today, and there's mincha. There's any number of other korbanot, and each category, asham. There are 5 different categories of asham. The Torah regulates and stipulates each one of these korbanot and the procedures by which that korban is brought. So again, I want to wish everybody a Chodesh Tov. Nisan is the first of the months. Tomorrow we'll be saying Hallel, and we'll now really into the season of our freedom. Again, I'll conclude by saying Rav Hirsch says that we have an obligation as people to have a sense of freedom within our creativity. That it's good to be creative. It's good to act, and that's freedom. But we also have to have freedom within obedience. Obedience within freedom. Freedom within obedience. That we as Jews, Hashem has blessed us with the ability to be able to make decisions, to make those decisions of our own free will. But with that comes a certain sense of obedience, that there are parameters within which we work, far different from what Western society, how it looks at the artistic and creative nature of human beings. May we always have obedience within the freedom that Hashem has given us, and may we also have freedom to act within the parameters that the Torah gives us. Okay, everyone, I wish everybody a good Shabbos. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov, Yeshua, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Myers. Good Shabbos, Chodesh
Good
Tov.
Shabbos, you're very welcome. Very welcome, Al.
Chodesh Tov.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.